In this video, we're going to dive into something that I absolutely love: behavioral economics. You know, the stuff that explains why we as humans often make decisions that aren't as rational as we think they are. So, if you're into understanding how our minds work, how our choices are shaped, and how to ultimately make better decisions in life, then you're in the right place. Today, I'm sharing my top 5 favorite books on behavioral economics. These books are absolute gems. They're insightful, they challenge your thinking, and they offer some great stories along the way. I'm going to take you through each one, break down their core ideas, talk about the author's perspective, and maybe even throw in a few critiques here and there. So let's kick off with a big one. Let's start with Nudge by Richard Thaler and Sunstein. Now, this book has been massively influential, and for good reason. At its core, it's about how small changes in the way choices are presented to us, these nudges, can significantly impact our decisions. The authors call this choice architecture. For instance, in the book, they talk about how simply rearranging the layout of a cafeteria can nudge people towards choosing healthier foods. Simple, right? But it's fascinating how these subtle changes can lead to big impacts on behavior. It's not about removing choices. It's about steering people towards better decisions without them even realizing it. The authors frame nudges as a way to improve public policy, whether it's in health or happiness. What I found really clever is their idea of libertarian paternalism. It sounds like a paradox, right? But the concept is that you can influence choices while still respecting freedom. You're guiding, not controlling. The downside, some people argue it's a bit manipulative. I mean, should we really nudging people? Does it cross an ethical line? Nudge addresses this criticism to some extent, but it's something to consider when you're reading. All in all though, I love this book for its practical applications. It really makes you rethink how decisions are shaped in everyday life, from the supermarket to the voting booth. How did you find the video so far? If you found it useful, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Alright, next up is Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. Now, if you like books that blend deep psychological insight with a sprinkle of humor, this one's for you. Ariely is fantastic at taking complex ideas and making them relatable. The core message of this book is that we're not as rational as we'd like to think. In fact, we're predictably irrational. And this is where the book really shines. Ariely shows us how our behavior follows certain irrational patterns, but these patterns are consistent, meaning that once we understand them, we can actually predict how we might go off course in decision making. For example, he talks about the decoy effect, which is when we're presented with option that's deliberately less attractive and it ends up steering us towards another choice. The classic example he gives is with pricing. Let's say you're choosing from 2 products, and then a third, slightly worse option is added. Suddenly, the middle option seems like a much better deal. Ariely's stories are both hilarious and eye-opening, and he pulls a lot from his own life. He was badly injured in a fire, and through his recovery, he became deeply curious about human behavior. That personal touch makes the book really engaging. Now, one criticism I've heard is that sometimes the examples can feel a bit oversimplified. But to be fair, that's kind of the point. Ariely is trying to make behavioral economics accessible to a wider audience, and I think he succeeds. The book will make you question every choice you make, and wonder just how much control you really have over your own decisions. Now, if you're looking for something a bit more academic, but still accessible, Misbehaving by Richard Thaler is a must-read. Thaler, who's one of the key figures in the development of behavioral economics, takes us through the history of the field, and does so with a bit of humor and a lot of stories. What's brilliant about Misbehaving is that it shows you how the field of behavioral economics came to challenge traditional economic theories. Thaler talks about how economists used to assume that people were these perfectly rational beings. But of course we know that's not true, and Thaler shows us why through decades of research and experimentations. He calls people humans rather than econs, which is a playful way of highlighting the gap between how we actually behave versus how traditional economics expects us to behave. One of the things that I appreciate about Thaler is how honest he is about the challenges he faced in getting his ideas accepted. Behavioral economics wasn't always a respected field, and Misbehaving really captures that journey. If I had to critique the book, I'd say it's a bit denser than Nudge or Predictably Irrational, especially in the middle. It's not as light of a read, but it's packed with insights. So, if you're into the behind the scenes of how behavioral economics evolved, this book is gold. The next book is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. This one is a classic, and for good reason. Definitely my favorite. It's a bit of a mammoth book, but it's incredibly influential. Kahneman, a Nobel laureate in economics, explores the two systems of thinking that shape our judgments and decisions. System 1 is fast, intuitive, and emotional. System 2 is slower, more deliberate, and logical. What's fascinating is how Kahneman illustrates the tension between these two systems. Our brains are wired to take shortcuts, what he calls heuristics. These shortcuts are useful, but they can also lead us astray. For example, he talks about the availability heuristic, where we judge the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind. It's why people tend to overestimate the risk of things like plane crashes. They are more memorable than, say, a car accident, even though the latter is far more common. Kahneman does a fantastic job of showing us just how flawed our thinking can be, especially when we rely too much on System 1. But he also acknowledges that System 1 is necessary, it's efficient, and we'd be lost without it. The challenge is to knowing when to switch to System 2. If I had to point out a flaw, is that this book is dense. It's not a casual read. You've got to really commit to it. But if you do, the rewards are immense. It's one of those books that will change how you think about thinking. And last but certainly not least, The Undoing Project by Michael Lewis. Now, this book is a bit different from the others on the list, because it's more about a narrative about the friendship between Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, the two psychologists who essentially created the field of behavioral economics. What I love about this book is that it's not just about the ideas, though there's plenty of that, but also about the human story behind the science. Michael Lewis, who's a brilliant storyteller, takes us through the collaboration between Kahneman and Tversky and how their partnership led to some of the most groundbreaking research in psychology and economics. You really get a sense of how their friendship, and sometimes tension, drove their work forward. It's a beautiful exploration of how two minds can come together to challenge the status quo and change the way we understand human decision making. If you've read Thinking Fast and Slow, this is a perfect companion book because it provides the context behind a lot of Kahneman's work. The downside? Some might feel it's more of a biography than a book on behavioral economics, but I think that's what makes it stand out. It's a reminder that behind every great idea, there are real people with real struggles and triumphs. So there you have it, my top 5 favorite books on behavioral economics. Each of these books offers something unique, whether it's practical insights, historical context, or deep psychological theory. And trust me, after reading these, you will never look at your own decision making the same way again. If you found this video helpful and you want to keep learning, I suggest you watching this one as your next video. So, see you there.